Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jonno White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jonno White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Frank Greeff. Frank is the CEO of Realbase. He's based in Australia, like I am. He's based down in Sydney. As listeners know, I'm still on my quest to get Tourism Queensland on board as a sponsor. If any of the TQ team are listening, I'm up in Brisbane, beautiful part of the world. But that's another story for another time. Frank, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jonno.
Hey, first of all, we were just saying before I started recording,
Really interesting. I've been really looking forward to chatting with you actually because I feel like you work in a really interesting space, and you have been leading and are leading now a company made up of that's gone through a lot of changes, and I find that fascinating, and I've been really looking forward to that. So tell our listeners a little bit about Realbase, and maybe just a quick sort of elevator pitch of the journey that you've been on, and just about what you do as CEO.
Yeah, awesome. No worries at all. So Realbase is a real estate marketing business. So it's a software company that focuses on real estate agents and the property transaction when it comes to either marketing yourself as an agent or marketing a property. Easiest way to think about it is we are a marketplace which connects real estate agents to real estate suppliers. So what most people wouldn't realize is every time a property goes, for sale in Australia and New Zealand, there'll be anywhere between 8 and 12 different suppliers who are, tasked with marketing the property. So thinking about photography, floor plans, signboards, brochures, social media, we connect all of those suppliers, so roughly about 1,000, to all of the real estate agents across Australia and New Zealand. And roughly 1 in 2 properties that sells across Australia and New Zealand will use our platform. So it's a bit like an engine to the real estate industry.
Wow.
Now, with regards to, I guess, with regards to the kind of the elevator pitch or the story behind it.
Yeah.
So myself and my brothers, we founded the business roughly 6 years ago, a business called Realhub. We had a large competitor in the industry that had been in the game for about 25 years. And over the course of about 5 years, we started to take a fairly significant amount of market share. And roughly about 18 months or 2 years ago, we actually got approached by that competitor, Campaigntrack, our now great friends, to merge our business. And so we did exactly that. We put together a merger. So at that time, they were the number one in the space, roughly 4 times the size of us. And we were, the close second. And we put together a 50-50 merger to create the new identity, which was Realbase.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, and maybe we'll get to hear a little bit more about that as we chat. But I want to start with, going back to the beginning for you, because I think what you and your brothers have created, and now what you've done, turning it into Realbase, is incredible. I have so much respect for what you guys have done. But let's go back to your childhood. I'm interested to hear, Frank, as you reflect on growing up, what are the moments from that time of your life, or even the themes that really shaped you into the person and the leader you are today?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something I've actually been doing a lot of reflection of, post the acquisition that's happened recently. I have a lot to owe to my parents. So our story is we were actually born in South Africa. At the age when I was about 4 years old, my parents, myself and obviously my 2 brothers and my parents, the whole family, they packed up everything they had, sold their property they owned, and moved to New Zealand for a better life. Essentially, they looked into our futures and went, we want to provide a better life for you guys. And so packed up everything they owned into 2 suitcases, moved to New Zealand. The rand at the time was roughly 8 to 1. So what would be a house in South Africa gets you rent in New Zealand, kind of thing. So they did that. Then my dad was a nuclear scientist, but none of your degrees pass through. He was also in the army, but couldn't just go and be in the army in New Zealand. So they had to take a bit of a humble pill and swallow it, and ultimately did everything they could to provide for us. So what they did was they worked at a place called Sea Lords, which is your frozen fish, at the New Zealand equivalent of Woolworths. My dad would sharpen knives by night, and my mum would fillet fish by day, and they would do the role reversal of looking after the kids in the night and day shift. So if I reflect back on that, the key there is they taught us the value of hard work. They taught us the value of sacrifice. But also, one of the biggest things is they taught us the value of money. I find a lot of people, certainly a lot of people that I know, get a little bit strange when they talk about money. So often they don't want to do it. It's a taboo subject. But my dad's favorite thing he used to do is take us to Woolworths, late at night at 9 p.m. and find what the discounted aisle looked like and show us how great the value of a chocolate milk for 19 cents is, because it's about the use by date is tomorrow. And that shaped us, because ultimately we were taught the value of money, and we were also afraid not to have those conversations as we were moving into the world of business, which obviously it all rotates around business. The reality is you need cash flow in to make sure that your business stays afloat.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, your parents are incredible. I can't even fathom what they went through to actually take the family into a new country and then work those jobs coming from there. Like, that's just incredible humility. Are there any stories? Are there any specific stories or moments about your mum or dad that you think of that pop into your head that really sum up what they're about, and or you remember, like you said, about your dad taking you to Woolworths? Anything else like that where you think, yeah, that's a good example of how dad, really taught me about how to think and mindset. Any other stories about your parents? They just sound amazing.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. So the big one for the the journey of our business was we were completely bootstrapped. We used every dollar that we had of our own money, and we made a dollar stretch very far. So again, to bring that back to my dad, and this might sound crazy to a lot of people, but it's just the reality is let's take us back. We were age. I was probably 6 or 7. We'd be in the food court of the local mall, and he would see he would see food on the table that someone's essentially wasted, and be like, well, that's that's perfectly good food, and like it's a it's a little bit embarrassing, but the reality is, like, it's about the concept is, like, there's nothing wrong with it, and hey, it's not going to cost. It's not going to cost money, and it's like that's showing the showing the truth of how to make it stretch and not being wasteful. That was a huge lesson for us, is just on not wasting. So the funny thing I like to laugh about as adults now is everybody you go to Woolworths and you get yourself some, of course not if you're a vegetarian, but if you get yourself a chicken breast or chicken thigh. Back in our time, they used to get the chicken bones, so like your chicken, essentially carcass, and that's made for producing stock. And so rather than having chicken breasts, they would fire up about 5 of those, because it would cost you about $2 to feed the family, and you'd pick off that. And so that's just truly just showing the ability to stretch a dollar and showing you, hey, this is what you can do with a little. And that was something that was ingrained in us, and exactly the kind of mindset that we took into our business. Not suggesting that we ate chicken carcasses at lunch, but reality is we had canned tuna and rice was our staple for about 5 years of our business, while we're paying ourselves roughly $400 a week, because every dollar counts.
Yeah. No, that's an amazing story. And once again, all I hear in that story is the humility. But that is an amazing business lesson as a young person to watch. And what I hear in that story is, it seems like it was like, we're going to do whatever we need to do to make this work, because we're thinking long term. We're committed to making this move work. We're sacrificing heaps, but we believe that it's going to pay off. And so it has for you and your family. I can hear that for your parents, but it also has, like, I imagine that mindset has happened with your business too. Because like you said, you guys just watched every dollar. It doesn't sound like you had big venture capital behind you. Like you said, you were just building it, like sort of building the airplane as you're flying it. And so what a wonderful mindset to have. The only way to really do that is to to think about it this way, is to eat the chicken carcass instead of the chicken breast until things add up. So I think that's an amazing lesson.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
How have you seen that at play in the business? Like, if you think about how you guys have run the business, what you've learned, 6 years doesn't sound long, but boy, I can just imagine the growth, the merger. Wow, it sounds like 30 years worth of business in the past 6 years for you and your brothers. How have you seen some of those lessons from your parents at play in the real world, running Realhub and now Realbase?
Yeah, so look, like especially in the early days, right? So the story actually goes a bit like this when you get down into the detail. Is I was a chef, so my I don't know if that had anything to do with the chicken carcasses. Maybe I wanted a better life for myself with food, but I had a dream from age 11 where I wanted to be a chef, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and all my studies at school were in relation to food tech, advanced food tech, and hospitality, and I finished school at age 17. I went and did my whole HSC and all that. I went to Bathurst Pavilion and I worked as a chef for 3 years. And so that whole process there taught me, that hard work. So, again, in the learnings from my parents is that, the benefit of hard work. I was doing about 60 hours a week, working Christmas, working Easter, everything like that. And one day, 3 years into it, I was earning about $32,000, and I was about to be, a qualified chef. And I realized, this is a lot of hard work for what isn't a great reward for me. And so one day, my brother came to me, and at the time, he was working as a real estate photographer. And he said, "There's an opportunity to pack up our bags, move to Melbourne, and start a real estate signboard business." And so that was actually 9 years ago. So when I talk about Realhub, that was like a pivotal a transition
Wow.
between the business we were and the business we are.
Yeah.
And so again, reflecting back to my parents is, during the time they were in South Africa, they moved 22 different times. My brother had never stayed in a school longer than 2 years. In New Zealand, we moved 4 times. And when we got to Australia, they've moved probably another 10 times. And so again, that was the learning lessons, is like not getting too attached to where you are. It's like, just if there's an opportunity, strike. And so within a few weeks of that conversation with my brother, we packed up our bags. We got into a ute and we drove to Melbourne, and outside of an area called Croydon,
Yeah.
we started this real estate signboard company inside a house. So in our living room, we would have a printer, a guillotine, we'd have two bean bags, and we would just grind it out, install signboards in the morning, help our customers in the day, and then start printing ready for the next day.
Wow.
And so that's a big thing that we learned, was just taking opportunities and not being too attached, being kind of nimble in life. It's
Yeah.
we'd never had a place longer than, like I said, a few years. So we were not attached to anything. We weren't attached to things. We were just willing to make moves and make opportunities happen.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I mean, I hear that, and it sounds to me like I really feel like you really deserve your success. You earned it. You did it the hard way. But I think as well, there's something beautiful about going through those times. Like, in hindsight, at the time, it's pretty tough, but it does teach you amazing lessons, which I think I think really helps position you to do something like you're doing now, where I feel like some of the same principles apply, but just on a different level. What were the biggest learnings you had? You moved to Melbourne, you're running it from the house, you've never done this before. You're used to hard work, being doing your chef training, but in those early days, and probably months and even maybe years, what were the biggest learnings you had about how to get a business off the ground?
Yeah, good question. So I think one of the biggest thing that I learned, and I can certainly see the difference now of where we are, is we weren't afraid to get our hands dirty, and we weren't afraid to do any one of the roles that's required in the business. So in the early days, like I said, we were physically installing the signboards. We had to do the sales. We had to do the templates. We had to do everything. And I think the biggest lesson that taught me is having depth as a leader is something that I strongly value, and this is sometimes controversial, but there are some leaders that I come across that they're in their particular field, and they're, when you ask them a question, let's say in my world, which might be about tech and product, it's like, oh, that's not my role, directed over there. Where, because the journey for us was, we did every single role. So when we trained a new team member, when we hired a new team member, we were the one training them. So when it comes time to today, like I probably don't wear the typical CEO hat of, oh no, that's too much detail, move on. I take the approach of, no, I want to understand the detail. So I have no software skills, I have no ability to write code. However, I will sit and wash myself with the knowledge from my brothers, who are the engineers of the business, because I want to know, because we all want to know, because if as a leader you don't have that depth and you're not in the lane, it's very easy for someone to essentially not pull the wool over your eyes, but
Mm.
it's easy to not understand. So if someone says, hey, the timeline is going to be a year, and you're like, well, I've personally done it before, I know it takes a week.
Yeah.
You don't have the depth. It's kind of hard to go, no, that's not the case. So it's much easier to kind of lose control of the business without either you have to have really trusted people in your circle, which I definitely do, but also I think it's just better to collaborate when you have that depth as a leader, and it doesn't specifically matter what it is. So when we went through the acquisition, right, like I had to go through a process of 6 months where I was working with the brokers, I was working with the accountants, I was working with the lawyers, and I was learning a lot of stuff that I just didn't know. And I could have taken the approach of, well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll just leave it in your hands. But like the reality is that's, in my opinion, not good enough. So from that 6-month journey, I learned all around what due diligence looks like from a legal, from a tech, and from an accounting perspective, learning all that knowledge so that ultimately when then I could sit in front of the room in front of the the potential acquirers, I had the depth and the knowledge to be able to talk where they can then go, okay, this person's trusted, they know what they're talking about, rather than having to bring 20 people in the room and each person takes their little elements and there's no one who holistically can look over the top.
Yeah, 100%. No, I agree. I think, and I think if we think about great leaders that have inspired us, I think one of the things about a great leader is they are willing to get their hands dirty. If you do need support, they are willing to jump in and sort of learn what you do and understand it as well. So I think it's not only great as a leader to understand so you can give better advice, but it's also, I think it sometimes when people are talking about unhelpful leadership they've experienced from others, it's because they were sort of absent. They weren't willing to really get in. They just sort of wanted them to get on with the work without actually understanding what they did.
100%. And to your point, there is that idea of the the great leaders that we've thought about and read about and all of that. Those are exactly the ones that I would listen to and installing the signs, which was the Steve Jobs of the world, where he would be looking at the microchip of the back of the Mac computer, making sure all the the chips and stuff lined up correctly because he was so detailed in the product. Or the Elon Musks of the world, who's like, I'm not really a CEO, I'm more of like that product person who understands deeply the product. Those are the kind of people that I like look up to and go, yeah, okay, that's the approach that I want to take. Not the that's not my role. I'll hand it over to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you. I can imagine there's a lot of listeners who are in a role where they're maybe a few years behind you with what you guys have done. So they're pushing through. They're doing the hard yards. Maybe they've grown to a handful of staff. And the question I want to ask is, when did you experience a ceiling, or were there multiple ceilings every month, every year? Do you remember, was there a point where you went, okay, it's like we need to almost pivot and because we've sort of outgrown where we've been? And can you reflect on that as you grew the company?
For sure. Yep. So there's a couple that come to my mind, not necessarily the biggest ones, but just ones that straight away, when you mention it, they came straight there. And this is probably one that's very relevant to a lot of people. So the first ceiling for us was, because myself and my two brothers were so, get your hands dirty type, happy to do whatever role was required, and wanted to make every dollar stretch. There was a real sticking point in the first early couple of years where it was, do we make the leap to hire our first team member beyond us three? And the concept was, looking at the money, we're just starting to make some money, we're just starting to make some profit. And it's like, well, if we add this person, one, what am I going to do? Because then, let's say I currently install the signs. What am I going to do tomorrow when I no longer have to do that? And two, well, how are we going to afford that? And so that was one of the biggest early ceilings that actually took a while to overcome. Like, we only hired our first person, I think, in year two. Perhaps, roughly year two, maybe even year three, because there was three of us. And for that decision, we had a kind of a beautiful symbiotic relationship between the three brothers, because we all aligned in our aspirations and where we wanted to get to, but we were different in our approach. And so the one brother was much more conservative, the other brother was way further out, way more willing to take risks, and then maybe I was in the middle. And so we'd have this beautiful dance every time a decision got made, big or small. It would be a screaming argument, and then it would kind of be like, well, two brothers against one, doesn't matter which way it goes. In the end, we know that two against one, we've got to make that decision, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember the only way we across the line was myself and the middle brother. We had made a decision. Okay, well, we are so committed to hiring this person that we will halve our salaries, which will then give us the exact amount of dollars to hire the next person. And so that was that ability to break through that ceiling. Was like, we'll put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah.
So what we did is we actually each owned an investment property. So we sold the investment property so that we didn't have to fund the mortgage. We then moved both of our, at the times girlfriends, now wives, together into a 2-bedroom apartment, and we paid ourselves $400 a week. And that happened for, roughly, for about 16 months, so that we could afford that first person, that first employee. And that was the start of the journey, which was, okay, well, once you've broken that ceiling, the rest kind of, it's a little bit easier. You know what I mean?
That's so cool.
The next one.
Yeah. Please go on.
Sorry, apologies. I was saying the next one was the biggest and the most pivotal in our business that shaped and changed everything. It is back to my parents and the sacrifice. So we were for the first 4 years of our business, we were within a franchise. So we actually didn't have our Realhub brand. We were working in a different company's software. We were using their brand. And that franchise was actually the same franchise that my parents owned. So we weren't their franchisees or their employees, but we both had the same kind of agreement. And so we had to make a decision at about year 4. We realized like where we wanted to get to in the future was kind of far outpaced where this franchise could help us get there in terms of software, in terms of brand, in terms of all of that. So we had to make a decision that was, we're going to go out on our own, and ultimately we're going to create our own brand, which was of course Realhub. And so we sat down in the room, myself and my 2 brothers, and we wrote down on the whiteboard, we said, what's the worst case scenario if we decide to do our own brand and our own business? And we said, well, by association, our parents will lose their business. So even though, nothing to do legally, none of that, had nothing to do with it. But if we do this, there's a potential by association. Now we launched Realhub. So we made that commitment. We said, okay, if that happens, we back ourselves to pay our parents whatever the dollar figure was, which at that time we said, okay, their business is worth $1 million. And we made that commitment that we promised each other, if that happens, we will pay that. And so we promised each other, we did what we said, we launched the business. And that was a really big ceiling, because then 3 months into our launch, our parents were 1 day away from selling their business. And I got a call at 5 a.m. from my brother, and he said, Mum and Dad have just lost their business. We need to, come to the office, and we need to start planning how we're going to get out of this. And in that moment, like, our whole world turns upside down. So, that was a ceiling that was thrusted upon us. It was a decision that we made, but then we didn't really realize that it was actually truly going to happen. And so at that time, they lost their business, lost their livelihood. All of the income within that day got stolen away. And for us now, the entire family is resting on the success of what we had to create as this new business, which was Realhub.
Oh man, how, like, what did that day and the next week and the next month look like when you were going through that? That must have felt like the pressure was on at a whole new level.
That was easily, I look back and I see that as being the best and the worst times of our lives. The best because from that gave us the drive that there was no option but to succeed. I often look back and go, if that didn't happen, I don't know if we'd be where we are today, because that was, in our opinions, you have no choice. You've made this decision, and if we're going to pay back this $1 million, like, we're not going to do it from working and getting a salary. We have to do something major. But the worst time, because, I remember so clearly, we were in that 2-bedroom apartment I was talking about, and my parents, like I said, sacrificed their whole life for us. I'm standing in the lounge room, the whole family's in this apartment, and I'm just seeing a tear roll down my mum's eye. And, they didn't take any, like, what could have been, we just getting angry at our children. We're so disappointed. They were like, this is not your fault. It had nothing to do with you. You guys, we back you. We believe in you, and don't feel bad. But I could see that literally crushed them, because they had been spending 10 years or so to build this business, build their livelihood, and they were getting ready for retirement.
Yeah.
And seeing that tear roll down my mum's eye, and all of us are just sitting there, like, the amount of weight and burden and like guilt was immense at that time. So it was really, really challenging.
Yeah. Wow. Your parents really are just incredible people, and I yeah, I just always it always brings a smile to my face when I hear about such wonderful people who've had a great influence. Um, do you remember the moment when you realized you were going to, like, because obviously, like you said, the best and the worst, because it really pushed you to know that you had to do it. But then there's always that question going, okay, we have to do this, but then there's a tiny question going, but can we? Do you remember the moment when you went, this is like, we've done it, like it's definitely on track? What was that moment for you?
So I think that moment for us was we always had this. So, fast forward a few years, the business was building. We always had to be, as a business, profitable, because there's no such thing as, we had to pay ourselves a salary, and there's no venture capital, there's none of that. So we had to keep the business afloat. But at that time, every time June would come around, we would just go and reinvest. So we'd be profitable by like $2. You know what I mean? So it never felt real in terms of we've done it, until the day that our competitors, Campaigntrack, walked through the door and said, we need to merge with you guys. That was the day that we went, okay, we've done it. Because we were, like I mentioned, we were one quarter the size. We were really getting some momentum.
Yeah.
And to have them walk through the door and validate us, to go, hey, there's definitely something here. We need to work together instead of fighting. And then also, because we knew that merger was happening, we then issued our parents shares. So we issued them 3% of the business, which was the moment that we knew this is going to work out, because we know that there's going to be an end result here, which is either dividends or a sale, or something.
Yeah.
And we're going to pay this back. And, just when the acquisition happened, they've been left with $3 million from that acquisition. And so we did, true to our word, we were able to pay it back and 3x it. And so the moment that merger happened was the moment we knew we've done it.
Oh man, how did that feel?
Absolutely incredible, like ridiculous. So like the guy, Wes, who's a great shareholder, great friend now, walked through the door. It was 6 weeks later. We were merged. We were in the same office, and we were off to the
Wow.
races. So we move incredibly fast. Rightly or wrongly, that could have gone a completely opposite way. Our accountants were saying slow down. Our lawyers were saying slow down. They're saying there's not enough due diligence. But we just knew that the deal was right on both sides.
Yeah.
That it was just the right thing to do. And that, this could be a whole different story of, like, the story of the failure and how I shouldn't have done that. But, luckily we'd built enough trust within that 6 weeks that we knew that it was the right decision. And we'd known about each other for, 4 years, because we were
Yes.
directly competing. So we knew the businesses on both sides were, they were profitable businesses are growing businesses. So it just made sense to us. So the 6 weeks felt like the right time.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story. I can't remember where I heard it, and there's always a chance it's a fairy tale, but I'm pretty sure there's truth behind it, around Warren Buffett and Walmart. The one of the, I don't know if it's the founder of Walmart, and Warren Buffett making a deal that was $2 or $3 billion
Yes.
worth, and they had, and I just remember hearing about this deal, and Warren Buffett, who's so notorious about how thorough he is, did that deal on a handshake. And I just remember hearing that, and just like my jaw dropped. But the point was, they'd worked so long together in different ways, and knew each other for so long. The trust was so complete that in that case, the trust was enough that he actually just was willing to do the deal on a handshake, and then move forward. And I think that's the beautiful thing about working with people where you have that level of trust. And so, yeah, it's like it sounds to me like there's a little bit of that in your story with how you and all the other stakeholders involved went through that sort of 6 week period.
Yeah, exactly right.
So, thank you so much for sharing. Oh man, I'm just blown away by your story, Frank, and just incredible. Let's as we sort of land, let's jump into Leadership Express, and I've got a few questions for you. The first one I want to ask you is about a book. What is a book that you've gifted to other people, or you recommended to other people? And if there are a couple, then you can share a couple.
Yeah, awesome. I was going to say one makes it very hard. So I probably have three that have shaped me. The number one was the most critical, I think, in shaping me, because I had to be thrusted into a sales role when we launched Realhub, because that was just, I could talk. My brothers were the geniuses, and that was a book by a guy called Grant Cardone, and he's a full character, but it's called the 10x rule, and that really helped to rethink the way I thought about what is possible around just taking the goal and timesing it by 10 and saying, okay, well, what would I need to do in order to get there? And the philosophy being, you'd rather be, a lot of people say you would rather have goals that are achievable. He's like, scrap that. I'd rather have a goal that's 10 times and miss it by 50%. I'm still way better than my initial goal. And that to me was, one, a great way to think, but also an amazing sales book. So 10x rule was one that I have done exactly that. I've gifted, I've told people about, I've read multiple times.
Yes.
The next one for me is the Steve Jobs book. So Steve Jobs, it's a meaty book. I don't do much reading. I do a lot of audiobooks.
Yes.
So that's a 22-hour book, but it's just incredible. Like he's just got an amazing story. Like I probably wouldn't want to be him in terms of his type of character, but just incredible story. And the one thing I love is hearing the stories around people that don't just do it once. That you can clearly see that 3 times, and you're like, yeah, okay, it's not just a fluke. You're absolutely nailing this. And the last one for me is the Nike book, The Shoe Dog. That's just an incredible story that I absolutely loved that story.
Oh, I'll have to check out. I know a lot about Grant Cardone, but I haven't read the 10x rule. I haven't read that book. The Steve Jobs, that book is one of my favorites of all time. I was laughing out loud reading that book. I don't know what it was, just the stories and just his, like, I think just how ridiculous his approach, and like you said, but also successful. Like, so it just felt like he was constantly surprising people. And then, but everything would work, and not everything. Like some things didn't. But yeah, like you said, I wouldn't even recommend him as the ultimate leader necessarily. But to read about the person, the human being behind what is incredible success when you look at, say, Apple and, like you said, others. That book is amazing, and I'll have to get The Shoe Dog. That's another one. So thank you. There are 3 brilliant recommendations, Frank. What is a So I want to ask you about entrepreneurs, because even though you've now gone through this, merger, you're still very much someone who has recently been in the shoes of an entrepreneur. So for our listeners who are entrepreneurs or on a side hustle where they're trying to take something big, what's the biggest problem or challenge for an entrepreneur who's funding it themselves?
Oof. That's an interesting question. I'm trying to think how to best answer that. I mean, look, I still feel like I'm going through all of that. Like the reality is, I'm 29 years old, so I still feel like I have a lot to learn, and perhaps I don't even know what that is just yet. But I think the ability for me to sit here today and be able to talk about hindsight and be able to connect the dots, like Steve Jobs says, you connect the dots. Looking back, it's very easy to look at the pathway, but looking forward, when you don't know if these things are going to be successful, that's probably the hardest challenge. Is you have to take so many leaps of faith where you don't know if you're going to be able to sit down and have be on a podcast and tell the story of how it all connected. It might just be the wrong decision and a failure. So that's number one is just having, you noting that you have to have many leaps of faith that you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And number 2 for me has always been making sure that you don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Like, I can't stress this enough. If anybody who knows me and works with me, they know that I'm an 80% guy for a lot of the stuff I do. I would rather get something out quickly and fast, and then, hey, it didn't work, that's fine, move on, than spend 2 years launching a project. So like when we first started, within 4 weeks we had our first customer. We hadn't even yet perfected our processes. We weren't even near perfecting a process, never even installed a sign, but that's what we needed to do, and just get those stepping stones happening and start going. So like, don't, if you're doing your side hustle, don't get too distracted around it has to be perfect before I launch it. It's like that is the easiest way to just drag you down into the mud and the details and never start, essentially.
Yeah, so good. I agree. I think that minimum viable product sort of idea, or there's a great book that I read a while back that was called Ready, Fire, Aim, and I just love that approach. It's like, if you want to be, I feel like that's entrepreneurship 101. You got to get ready, you got to fire, and then you got to work out, okay, what happened, and then aim. So I completely resonate with what you said. That's gold. What about, one thing that always comes up is, and it's really great having a leader on, like you said, you're 29. I have lots of leaders on who are in their 50s and 60s. So I'm interested to ask you about morning routine, about, when you look at what leaders are researching entrepreneurs, people are obsessed with the 5 a.m. wake up and morning routine, and rightfully so, because it's important. But what's your advice? Are you I wake up at 4:30 a.m. or, like Mark Wahlberg famously up at 3 a.m. or something? Or are you that doesn't matter at all if you're an entrepreneur in 2022?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is there is no one way. There's no one way to get to the success. I think you can definitely do that, and look, to be honest, that was, for the majority of my time, that is what I do. But I think there's so many different pathways to get to the end result, and the outcome is what I care about most. So, I heard a good thing yesterday in a podcast I was listening to, which I absolutely loved, was this concept of things come in seasons. So, there's some people who will be, I'm the 5 a.m. person every day, always, for the last 20 years. That's amazing. But I couldn't resonate more with this concept of things come in seasons. Sometimes I do really long hours at work, and I get behind my desk at 5, and then other times I'm doing 9 to 5:30 on the dot, right? And it's like, I'm open to things coming and going in seasons. And so, like, prime example, 4 weeks ago I went on holidays. Before that, I was doing 5 a.m.s every day. I train 5 days a week. But post the holiday, I've kind of fallen into a routine where I'm actually waking up at 6, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to beat myself up over that, and it's also not going to be a change in the air to all of a sudden you no longer can create success because you're not following this exact guideline or this exact book. I don't kind of subscribe to the concept of this is the exact guideline to be successful.
Yeah, love it. No, I think that's a great answer. Okay, this one can be something fun or it can be something serious. What is a movie or TV show that's like an ultimate favorite of yours, or had a big influence on you?
I don't know about influence, but it's a good story for the people who know it. So when I was asked to be the CEO of Realbase as we did the merger, my first thing I did is I said, okay, well, there's two businesses coming together. I think the number one thing we need to focus on is aligning cultures, because we need to be able to keep the great people that we have today. We need to align them, and we need to drive towards a common cause. And so I said, okay, well, we need to do that by getting in a really solid, HR person, and not your, check a box contract style HR, but more of the person who can promote and get everybody excited and values driven. And I was watching the show, and I love the show Billions, right? And there's the main lady of Billions is like a psychologist and kind of like HR, and she sits down and like breaks them apart, and then she sends them back out, and then they conquer the world. And so I had this concept, and I was like, I love that. And so the awesome lady by the name of Bobby, who's now our chief human resources officer, nice big title, she called me up, and I was talking to her, and I was in the moment. I was all excited, and I was like, look, I have this vision that I'm going to have this lady from Billions, and this is the role I'm suiting, right? And so I thought, this is awesome. This is so good. And I said, I really want you to watch an episode of Billions to understand what I'm saying. I get off the phone, I walk inside, I tell my wife how excited I am. And she was like, are you serious? Like on the first episode, that lady, the lady gets the whips and chains out and does all that. And I was like, oh no, like, oh no, I'm sending weird signals here. And luckily Bobby was an absolute champion. She never raised it. I never raised it because I was just so awkward. And then 1 year later, only a few months ago, she said to me, hey, I need to talk about this. She goes, I sat down with my husband immediately after that conversation. We watched an episode and he looks at me and he goes, are you sure? Like, are you sure you want to work there? And thank goodness we can have a laugh about it. Definitely not the intention.
Oh, that is such a great story, Frank. I love Billions as well, and that is, you know, it is, and it's one of those things where it's people have brought it up multiple times. You do learn so much from shows like that because the writers are so like they're just brilliant at dissecting real world like. Their real world principles. Now, yes, the stories are like always, you know, stretched because they make it, you know, they got to keep you on the edge of your seat every season. But and I completely see how that happened because her role is, like you said, is brilliant. Having someone who really is there to not just tick a box with who are we hiring, how are we managing them, but actually really across the culture. And yeah, I know exactly the scene you're talking about, and it's just cracking me up. That is fantastic. Oh, so good. And really genius to have to be focusing so much on someone in that role. So that was gold. That made my day. Okay, one more question for you as we land. If you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader who's listening, what would you say to them?
My number one thing would be absorb everything you can, wherever you can, and don't be restricted by your current 9 to 5 or whatever hours you are confined. And what I mean by that is to do the learning of whatever it is you want to do. So let's talk about leadership, talk about sales, talk about tech. If you're confined to your current business, as in that's where you're getting your learning lessons from, you're going to be just shaped in one specific way. So the thing that I always did and a key reason for my knowledge and everything like that today, and I'm still nowhere near where I want to be, is I just learned and absorbed from everywhere I can, from people that I may not agree with to people I definitely agree with, to, you know, from sales to marketing to everywhere. I would absorb through audiobooks, through YouTube. I bought Grant Cardone's sales program, which cost me $1,500 at the time. Everywhere I could, not from your traditional, you know, schools and universities. I didn't do that, but from all those places, which like books are just incredible wealth of knowledge. That would be the biggest thing because that would have the biggest impact. If you put that time and energy and effort into, whether it be just when you're driving to work, whether it be when you're going for a walk, wherever, that will make the biggest impact over, you know, the compounding interest effect of you learning over the long term.
Yeah, I agree. And I think books are, you know, particularly that like that Steve Jobs book, you know, so it's so sad how he passed away at such a young age, really. And so it's impossible to be mentored by him. But his story, you can be mentored by his story. And same as the Shoe Dog. So anyone who's listening who's feeling really inspired from listening to Frank, go and get at least one of those 3 books: the Grant Cardone 10X book, the Steve Jobs, I think it's Walter Isaacson. Is that the one? That's the mega big biography. Right, yep. And then the Shoe Dog. Get one of those and start reading it now. And I promise you, completely agree with Frank. It's the best way to invest in your leadership. Well, Frank, for those who've really enjoyed today and want to maybe follow you online, connect with you if something you shared has really inspired them, or depending on where people are based, maybe find out about Realbase. How can people connect with you online?
So, rightly or wrongly, I don't have Instagram. So it's something I kind of cut out of my life a number of years ago. But the one place is LinkedIn, so you can find me there, Frank Greeff. If you want to learn about a business, it's realbase.io, or you just type in Realbase into Google, and that Perfect. You'll be able to learn about our business. Yeah, LinkedIn is where I do a bit of speaking gigs and different podcasts and things like that. And if you want to have a chat, and anybody, I'm very open to the, as I move to the next stage of my career. I'm I'm really open with my with people who want to learn and want to ask questions and things like that. I'm very open to that. I'm not necessarily open to getting sold to about things, but open to what the experiences I can have and pass on. I never had a mentor as such when I was going through the journey, and I'm always open to to offering that into the future as I see that I can start offering value.
Yeah, amazing. Well, if Frank's if today's really inspired someone, then please do jump on LinkedIn. And it's always nice to hear when you've shared something and it's really made a difference for someone. So let him know. I do want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Such a wonderful podcast, just jam packed with stories. I think Frank's parents win the award for just best human beings I've come across in the past few months. Like, wow, I'm just blown away by your parents, Frank. For our listeners, don't forget, I also have the Jonno White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast. So feel free to go and check those out if you want to continue to invest in your leadership. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to you, Frank, as I said, for sharing just epic stories and for being such a joy to spend time with. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Appreciate you having me on, and hopefully a bit of value there for the listeners.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jonno White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.